Okay, Jay is a Black queer muva, educator, advocate, nature enthusiast, and full spectrum doula, envisioning futures and pathways forward rooted in Black imagination while centering radical pleasure, community care, and love. Their work as a doula is to guide folks in shifting the way we think about birth, abortion, sex, and wellness by replacing fear and shame with empowerment through education and exploration. Jay is an advocate for finding pleasure through play, and their quote unquote secret agenda is to bring wellness to the community by creating affirming and supportive spaces for people to thrive. Welcome, Jay. How did I do on the muva?
Great. It's always interesting, like hearing a bio read by someone else,
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
me writing it.
In
I'm
your
like,
own, like in your own voice in
yeah.
your mind. Yeah.
I'm like, that's me. Yes, I do that. Yes.
Totally. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, will you share with us your pronouns and where you're joining us from today?
Yes, I use she and they pronouns, and I am in Austin, Texas.
Nice. Oh, that's cool. I haven't been there, but I've heard such good things about it.
You know,
Okay.
it's Texas.
You're like, yeah, sort of, yeah. Yes, I feel that too. So I would love to kind of begin at the beginning. Just what is your story that led you to do this work of how you say I love, which is shifting the way we think about birth, abortion, sex, and wellness?
Well, I always like to say I've done some sort of care work my whole life. Um, but the idea of shifting the way that we think of things didn't really happen until I was an adult. Um, I
Mm,
realized in college, I was in an organization and they had what was called Sex After Dark. Like it was supposed to be the reproductive justice like department had come to do a talk to the organization, and they're asking questions and things, and I'm like answering stuff, and asking questions, and I was realizing everybody else was quiet and kind of looking and kind of like
oh, wow.
yeah, giggling and kind of like shy about it. And it was just
Right.
interesting because this whole group, I've heard them talk about sex, but never
Right.
never in this way. So that was kind of the first thing I was realizing, the disconnect of how people think about sex and reproduction. And it was
Mhm.
like you'll have the story with your friends, but not necessarily knowing about the health aspect. Um,
Mm.
and then when it came to kind of the full spectrum of doula work, my interest to that was supporting my sister who actually was having a stillbirth. Um, and
Mm.
so that really showed me like, yes, birth and pregnancy and those things can be beautiful, but there's also a full range of like experiences and outcomes that all deserve care and support. And so that was
Totally.
really my entrance into like doula support in that way, right off the bat, just,
Mhm.
you know, realizing how much there needed to be. Um, and then my own experience around pleasure, the birth of my son, and the changes in my body, how I felt about myself, um, at that time being a single parent and navigating pleasure in postpartum and all of those things. And so all of that together really just,
Yeah.
yeah, just helped me to realize like, wait, people are not talking about these things at all. And if they are, it's
Mhm.
very small chunks of what they are comfortable sharing and in very specific situations and environments. So I was like, let's shift that. Let's
Right.
hold on.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. That was gonna be my next question is like, how do you want us to shift our thinking? Like, what are we shifting away from, and what should we be shifting towards?
Ooh. So I want there to be a shift from kind of that like one isolated thinking of there were so many people who aren't taught about their bodies, so then they don't know about it, and then they have to kind of learn by themselves versus this kind of open community
Totally.
aspect. Yeah. So that's one
Mhm.
part. Like, let's not navigate in isolation. And then the second part is
Yeah.
also, let's broaden what we think of when we think about like pleasure, sex, birth,
Mm.
loss. It Not everything is binary, and not
Mhm.
everything just happens one way. And so for people to
Right.
really expand what they, expand their mindset, really think for themselves, research and decide, what do I believe? What feels good for me, for my family, for my body, for my own experiences,
Mhm.
and then make decisions based on that rather than based on just what you're told or out of fear or out of shame for something. Really kind of reclaiming like your autonomy to make decisions.
Yeah. Totally. I love that. Yeah. I especially love the getting rid of the binary in all ways, just like broadening
Yes.
our the way we think about everything. Yeah.
Yes.
Totally.
It's not just one or the other every time. Like, hold on, dude. let's
Yeah.
let's open this up. You may only have certain experiences and certain
Right.
identities and whatnot, but there's so much more out there.
So much more. Yeah, totally. I love that. Um, and so I also love that you call yourself an advocate for finding pleasure through play. Will you explain what that means to you and some examples of what that could look like?
Yes. First, I also love that terminology. um, a lot of the work that I did prior to doula work was with kids and families. So I'm always
Mm,
educating and working with kids in some way. And I just love how children just play. They have fun. They make almost anything a game. Um,
mhm.
but at some point, once we become adults, like,
Yeah.
we don't know how to play anymore.
Yeah, totally.
um, and so, shifting it to, like I said, the adult lens, finding pleasure through play is around this idea of like, you can find pleasure and you can like have fun, you can laugh. Not everything we do has to have like a positive or negative outcome. Like, it's okay for there to be space to just like try something.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
and so that's kind of where it came from, like pleasure through play of like just being and trying things, both within and outside of like sexual pleasure. Um,
Mhm.
and even with having sex, like I love when I can laugh and joke.
Yes.
It's
Yeah, totally. It doesn't
like,
have to be serious.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like, hold on, I'm moving, my knees are popping. I'm like, whoop, you heard that? Like, like, it's okay. And that
Totally.
also just shows that whether you're with yourself, with someone else, or multiple people, like that level of safety and vulnerability to
Mm.
also just be able to like laugh and play and feel free, like feels
Yeah.
really good and is like a whole form of pleasure
Mm.
in itself.
Mhm.
And then some
Totally.
examples. I guess those were a few examples, I guess.
Yes.
um, yeah, that's a couple, just being like open to
Mhm.
play and just kind of unadultifying pleasure a little bit. Uh,
Yes.
yeah,
Oh, I love that word, unadultifying. Yeah. That's brilliant because it's like, yeah, almost play could be anything that, doesn't have like a purpose. It's not like this has a purpose. It's just, fun to do or enjoyable to explore.
yeah, yeah. And that is like such a key piece because kids, they just
Mm,
do things just they're
totally.
just, I'm like, why are you on? They're just doing things. It makes sense to them.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Adult,
Yeah.
everything has to have clear reason, clear understanding. It has to feel, and there has to be an outcome, and which
Right.
sometimes can be great, but then also that doesn't allow you to just be, and
Right.
just try and just, do this thing. Obviously,
Mhm.
setting up a safe, consensual container for these things to occur, but
Right.
adults, we really don't often, have the chance for that. So when you're
Mhm.
able to be intentional about like creating space for yourself to experience pleasure or to actually play, then
Mhm.
it's really interesting how that shows up for people.
Yeah. I wonder too if it like something that kind of clues you into the fact that it's play is maybe something that brings you into the present moment because there's
Hmm.
no like thought about the outcome.
Hmm.
I wonder if
Yeah,
that
I
would
think
yeah, interesting.
trying to be present, which is really hard for a lot of
Yeah.
people because
Yes.
your mind is
Yeah.
always moving. At least I can speak for myself. My mind is always
Mhm.
moving. And sometimes with neurodiversities, I'll be thinking about this and this. And then it's like, oh,
Yes.
wait, now I'm not even present.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I love that. Um, do you have a pleasure practice? And if so, what are some of the benefits you've noticed from having one, if you have one?
Yes, yes. I'm actually deep in a pleasure practice
Ooh,
currently.
nice.
um, so I think I always have to give extra nuance to things. Whenever people say pleasure practice, I think some folks just think of like, do you do something for pleasure? And so a lot of people would
Mhm,
say yes. But
mhm,
when I think of a pleasure practice, it's like something that I am intentionally sitting down and thinking through what, like,
mhm.
this is a practice, this is like a ritual, something I'm going to like actually try to hold myself to in a sense.
Right,
Um,
okay.
and so normally I tend to be very find pleasure in lots of things, pretty optimistic about life. So it's just like, I'm like, oh yeah. But then there's times that I go through either high stress or go through grief or whatever the case. And in those moments, it is
Mhm,
very hard to connect um, to like pleasure. And so I just
totally.
navigated a lot of that from a move, from a
Mm,
recent miscarriage. Um,
mm,
and for myself, I didn't realize in that moment that I wasn't accessing pleasure really
mhm,
um, until my co parent like sat me down and was like, Jay, what's
mm,
going on? You're not like, I've been, not to pressure, not from a place of pressure, love and care, but like, I gave
right.
you some space. You've been like on the couch. I've been noticing this. It's been dark. It's been, and I'm a big like open the
Yeah,
blinds, let the light in
sure.
kind of person.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
he was just like, what do you need? How are you feeling? Let's figure this out. And so he shared
Mhm,
some other things too. But really, with that conversation, kind of made me realize where I was. And I was like, I have not really connected to myself in that way. Like, I was connecting to my heart and how I was feeling, to my womb, and like, oh,
yeah,
this baby and things like that, but not necessarily
yeah.
like thinking of myself and like finding pleasure. Um,
Right, right.
so when creating my pleasure practice, I do very good at having a timeline. I was like, I need
Mm.
a goal. I'm a Capricorn. Give me a goal. Give me a
Ah, yes.
layout.
Yeah. I love it.
So I told myself I like got a sheet of paper. I was like, okay, I like to draw and just write things out. So I said for the month of May, what does like my
Mm,
pleasure practice look like? What are things that bring me joy? What are things that feel good to me? What are things I am going to intentionally try to do on a daily basis to help get me
mm,
to where I know I can be?
right.
And so that's kind of some of the things that I was doing to like create my pleasure practice. Um, so for me, some of those things, not all of them, but some of the things on the list, like one was around getting out and like moving my body. Um,
Mhm.
we just moved to a new place, so there's like nice sidewalks and stuff here.
Oh,
So I'm like, okay,
good.
I was like, let me try to do 10 miles for the month of May. And I'll only count it on the days where I actually want to like get out and do it and I'm feeling good. If I'm like, oh, I
Nice.
gotta go, then I'm not gonna do it. Um,
Right.
and so the first couple days, I'm like, okay, yay, let's go. And then I had a couple days I wasn't feeling it, so I didn't do it. I wasn't gonna force
Mm,
myself to. And then the day I got back to it, I was like, oh, I missed this. I'm like, missed it? You're not even a runner. But
Mm.
it felt good to be getting that fresh air, and moving.
Yeah,
And like,
totally.
I just met my goal this morning and it's only been 2 weeks. um, I was just like, what? And so just doing that and like moving my body and being outside and doing things in that sense that brought me pleasure, like it felt really good. So then it
Mm-hmm.
made doing some of the other things for my pleasure practice actually really easy to do. Um,
Interesting.
so one of the other things was like creating a space for myself, which I also tell people,
Mm.
depending on where you live, what you got going on, your space may be like creating a little basket. It may be a closet.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a full room.
Mm-hmm.
But this is my room, but it's I was like, okay, let me lay out my mats. I like to be on the floor and comfy. I've got some ropes if I want to play with ropes. I've got some colored
Mm.
lights that I can put on if I want to take some sensual photos, like any of the things. So like I wanted to create my space and really make it just for me. And so as I was doing that, I was
Mm.
like, oh, this could be good here. And like it just like made me excited again to create something that was just for me. Because in
Right.
day to day, I hold multiple hats and different roles. And so it's not often that I do get something that is just for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was my second like big piece of my pleasure practice is like creating my own space and then entering
Mm-hmm.
that space every day, whether it's
Mm.
5 minutes, 50 minutes, whatever the case. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then the last thing, which I have like a partner that I can like navigate this with, but it was to also like touch him. um,
Yeah.
touch is one of like in relationships, let me be clear, in relationships, touch
Right.
is like my number one love language. If I don't know you, I'm like,
Mm. Right.
oh. But in
That's fair.
relationships, yeah, touch is my
Yeah.
number one like love language. So I love to like massage. Like I create my own like butters and oils and things like that. And so I
Oh,
was telling
nice.
myself like, like use your shea butter, use your oil, and just like massage. So some days it would just be like his hands, some days the back, some days other areas.
Mm.
But
Yeah, yeah.
and like although that was something for him that he's like receiving,
Yeah.
it was really I was doing it for me because like I
Oh,
actually like to
interesting.
be, I like to touch and to give, and that like monotony of doing certain movements
Mm.
feels really good to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, cool.
and so, yeah, those were three things that I had on my pleasure kind of practice that I've been doing this month. And I feel like I've been waking up like cheesing, been feeling excited, and and it just makes me
Yeah.
feel more creative and like ready to even do things on my business and ready to see clients again because
Mm.
I had paused seeing clients while I processed.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, I'm just like, oh, this feels great. I need to like
Oh.
revisit my pleasure practices every month.
Right. Right. Oh, that's awesome. And also I just want to say I'm so sorry for your loss and
Yeah.
just thank you for sharing about that. That's
Mhm.
yeah, that's so tough. Um, and I love that you give yourself like some grace when you're not feeling it, like
Mhm.
that it's not like a that your pleasure practice doesn't become like a forceful thing on
Mhm.
yourself. It's like you're giving yourself that wiggle room. Like,
Yeah.
okay, if I'm not feeling like going out inside and moving my body, I don't have to.
Mhm.
That feels so kind.
My other partner will tell you I'm always like never by force, always ease, always ease.
Yes.
So like
Yeah.
yes, please, a life of ease is what I want. We're not forcing. Sometimes there's a little
Right.
work, but we're never forcing.
Right. I love that. I love that. Because, like, then what's the point of a pleasure practice if it then feels like
Yeah.
another, burden? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's so cool. So I would love to talk about your rope practice if you're open. I've
Yes.
never, is
Yes.
that okay? Cool. I have never done one, or I know nothing about it. So I would love to just kind of know what it is and how you got into it, and what are some of the benefits of doing it.
Yeah. So I'm going to be biased as I share about it. But so rope play, also known as shibari, which is a Japanese rope bondage art. And then there's
Oh, cool.
kinbaku, which is kind of a branch of that, but it's more of an emotional and sensual aspect of it as well. That's more
Oh, neat.
so
Yeah.
what I tend to do. Um, you'll find different people in the rope community who do ropes and like are very their I guess purpose behind it is different. So some people really
Mm.
care about the like the aesthetics of it and the art aspect. So they do these
Oh,
ties that are
interesting.
like very intricate, and I'm like, whoa,
Wow.
And then
Wow.
I know some ties, but I'm like, mm-mm. My goal is not to be that intricate. If I do something and it looks great, I'm like, let's please take a picture because it may not look like this again.
Right, right.
I definitely lean into like the emotional and sensual aspect. Because I'm a tactile person. Like I said earlier, I like touch and feel. And so
Right.
even the process of like feeling ropes on me, if I'm being tied or if
Mhm.
I'm tying someone, is really like can feel really good. And
Mm.
then I'm also big on like my senses. So like, okay, nice, slow everything down, like lower lights, slower music, put on an incense. Like I really, it's a whole
Nice.
vibe.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's even like if I'm doing rope by myself and not with someone else, I still kind of create, I guess, like a ritual around it. Um,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, some people also do suspension. So they'll like tie and like, suspend people up.
Okay.
Um, I,
Yeah.
I don't do that either. I have been suspended. I do not suspend people. Um,
Okay.
and so it's pretty much just a type of BDSM, a type of kink.
Mhm.
But the level, or I don't want to say severity, but the level of risk, I guess, in it, because with all kinks, there's some type of
Mm.
risk, and it's important to be aware of that. I keep it
Mhm.
pretty low key on the risk
Gotcha.
area. Um, but
Okay.
yeah, I love doing some benefits, I guess, for me. It's one, a form of play because not often
Mm.
are you just tying people up or getting tied up. It's
Yeah.
a, like, or I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know, depending on your profession, who knows?
Right.
Um,
Right. That's true.
it,
Some people are.
yeah, it's a form of like connection. So I have a rope partner who is not my
Mm.
like nesting or like live-in partner, and we
Mhm.
specifically just do rope together. Like that is the nature of the whole. We do rope. Occasionally, we may go on a hike and hang out, but it's really that we do rope together. And
Okay.
so that's a very like intimate connection, but intimate
Mhm.
in the sense of like it's us very close and like really learning each other and trusting each other as well, um,
Yeah.
in this
Interesting.
way. And so for me, I tend to be a fairly dominant person in most aspects of my life. Nice, but
Uh-huh.
still kind of in a like leading, take charge kind of
Right.
way. And so,
Right. Capricorn vibes
yeah,
again.
exactly. um, so when we get to do rope, usually I serve as a bottom. So I'm being tied. Um,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
or at least for the past year that's been the case because I've been playing
Mhm.
with this concept of like vulnerability and like power play and like the power and also being able to like be submissive or to allow things to just be. um
Right.
and
Right.
so my rope practice has like really supported me in that. And I'm like, okay, wow, this actually does feel good. I don't have to like be in charge of something. I don't have to make a decision. I don't have to like think about all
Yeah.
the things, I can just
Right.
let it go. I can be here. I can enjoy the music, see how this feels. It's a little bit of compression. Well, I like compression. Not every person who's
Right.
tied does. And so like that just feels like good on my skin, on my body. Um, and so yeah, I just
That's
like
so
doing.
cool. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And I'm envisioning I've seen a little bit of, folks doing a
Mhm.
rope practice, and it is really beautiful, like the patterns that the rope makes
Yeah.
on the body, like depending on the different ties. And I'm wondering, is the rope soft? Because I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking like rough rope, but is it?
You're like, well, so it kind of depends. It's usually not as rough as you may think, but it depends on like
Okay.
there's so many different materials of rope. Um,
Okay.
Also, if you use like a natural fiber, like a hemp or something, or like a straw type of natural fiber,
Yeah, that's what I was
typically,
imagining.
yeah, it's supposed to anyway, go through like a prep process before you actually use it
Okay.
on your body. So it's not like,
Okay.
as firm. And the more you
Give it.
use it, the softer it gets.
Okay. Okay,
Mhm.
cool. Yeah, that's cool. I was just, it's so funny when you were talking about that. I had this memory of when I was a kid, I used to ask my mom to tie me to my chair so when I
Mhm.
would eat when I would eat dinner. You're like, yeah.
Hey.
And she just, yeah. I just remembered that. And I was young. I was probably like, I don't know, maybe four, maybe like
Mhm.
four, 3 or 4. And she thought it was hilarious. And so she took
Yeah.
a picture of it. And I have this
Oh, she
picture of me
did
tied to my
it.
chair.
That's so funny. See, but I mean,
Yeah.
although different, it still kind of shows back to that, like, as children, like, children have the space to explore, like, sensory things. Because really, a lot of kink
Yeah.
and BDSM is all, like, sensory related play, you know? Um,
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like going, what things calm your nervous system? What things do you want to try? What thing, And as adults, we may be
Hmm.
less apt to like ask for that, or to even be open to
Right.
trying that. So,
Right. Totally.
but yeah, I
Yeah.
love
And I
rope.
think,
Oh,
yeah, I can tell. That's so cool. I can also see the benefit of like, just being forced to not be in control, to just
hmm,
like I literally can't do anything, so I just have to let it go. Like
hmm,
that seems
yes.
like for
Well,
when I was a kid and wanted to be tied to the chair, it was like maybe because I didn't want to, like, my mom kept being like, you have to sit and finish your dinner, and so it was like, maybe if I was tied, I wouldn't have to like make the decision to like sit
hmm,
here and finish my dinner. I would just have no choice.
yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, that's so interesting.
yeah, I think it's also really interesting because when people think of like kink, BDSM, things of that nature, even rope, um, there's also a lot of prep and like conversation and consent that goes into all the things.
Mm,
So even in those moments where I'm
okay.
like not able to move or do things as much, we still have an understanding of like what is and what isn't okay.
Right.
And if at
Okay.
any point I'm like, and so that also um feels really good of like I can release control, but I still trust this
I
person.
see.
And I know
Right.
that if needed, here's my safe word, or here's how we're communicating
Right.
throughout this practice.
Yeah. Okay. That
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So that increases the safety level so that you can relax and feel that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's
exactly.
awesome. Oh, so neat. So I would love to talk about when queer folks are trying to conceive, the process can become so highly medicalized, and pleasure can really get left out of the equation unfairly because it can be
Mhm.
a huge part of the equation, in other situations of trying to conceive. So I'm wondering, what are some ways that folks can center their own pleasure, and especially while on their fertility journey?
Yes, I first off, I think this is a great question. Specifically in fertility, and I feel like in a lot of reproductive aspects in general,
Yeah.
pleasure gets gets left out of the
Yeah,
conversation. Like
totally.
Yes. So, yes, let's talk about
Totally.
it. um, so, one thing I would say for people, trying to conceive and going through that like process, which can be very, like you said, medicalized, it can be a long process, it can be a physically taxing
Mhm.
process, all the things. Um, is kind of how I mentioned what I was doing before about the pleasure practice, but like being really
Mhm.
intentional and like sitting down and creating a pleasure practice versus
Right.
being like, oh, I kind of have one. I do this sometimes, I do this other times. And it's not like a real practice, it's just things that you do. But um,
Right.
the same time when you're sitting down thinking, do we want to go on this journey to be parents, or do I, or want to go on this journey of
Mm.
fertility, it takes a lot of thought and intention to do that. You're looking through different methods, you're looking at different providers, you're looking at all these things. And so I think
Right.
also prioritizing your pleasure while doing those things should be an aspect
Mhm.
um, for yourself, and if you're with someone as
Yeah.
well. And so
Yeah.
sitting down, creating that, like, what does that pleasure practice look like, both
Mhm.
within and outside of sexual things. um,
Mm. Mhm.
so if that is running for you, then maybe that's what it is. If it is,
Right.
you like to paint, okay, maybe it's painting, but being really intentional about doing something for you, for your, like,
Mhm.
your energy, your spirit, and then also something tactile and pleasure related that is for your body as well. Because
Mhm.
going through that fertility journey can impact, body, mind, spirit, emotion, like all the things.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Yeah.
you want to be able to kind of also be filling that cup up, or like already have it full or plan to refill it as you're going through the things, versus
Right.
that cup being empty or feeling like it's empty. And then you're trying to figure out, how do I get water now that my cup is already empty, versus let's
Right.
locate the
Right.
well, let's figure it out now so then we can just go
Right.
back over time.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Have that plan in place. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Um,
um I love how you said also that, that a fertility journey can affect so many different levels. And so when you're creating your pleasure practice, to also think through those levels, like what's going to give me pleasure emotionally, what's going to give me pleasure spiritually, what's going to give me
mhm.
pleasure physically, like to make sure
Yeah.
you're also, hitting those. Yeah, I love that.
And I think specifically in the fertility journey, when thinking about the body, and a part of pleasure practices in general that I like to like tell people about is creating like a mantra or a mindset, um, or even like some words of gratitude that every time you're doing this
Mm,
practice, that you make sure to do specifically for your body. Because I think as you're going through the journey,
mm,
sometimes in fertility, you can become so focused on your body doing or not doing a job, a very specific thing at a specific time,
yes.
that
Yeah.
sometimes you can forget all the things that your body's doing and handling, even outside of
Right.
fertility. Um,
Right.
and so making sure to like honor and like give your body that gratitude kind of throughout, of like, this body is amazing as it is. This body is doing a lot as it does, and like honoring
Mhm.
those things as well. And saying it truthfully and believing it as well, I think is
Mhm.
really, really important. So no matter how your fertility journey is going, you still know and believe that to be true about yourself and your body, and
Mhm.
not just thinking about your body once there's a specific outcome, because it's a whole journey.
Yes. Yeah, that's such a good point, and I'm so glad you brought that up because our bodies go through so much on fertility journeys, and sometimes it can take a while, and yeah, it can become quite transactional, that relationship with our bodies, and one-dimensional. So I'm so glad you said that, to really take the time to give back to your body and give
Mhm,
gratitude and make sure your body's doing okay. Yeah, and feeling
mhm.
loved, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's so
Um,
important.
and I do want to add my last thing
Yes,
because I'm
yeah,
like, I feel so
absolutely.
passionate about this. depending on the nature of like how you're going through your fertility journey, whether you're having to take certain
Hmm.
medicines, if you're doing injections, if like whatever that looks like. Also seeing
Right.
if there's ways to incorporate pleasure around that as well. So if it
Oh,
is you
interesting.
have to do
Yeah.
injections, okay, does that mean I can get like a little massage here, that become part of the practice, and that you kind of
Yeah.
can pair something that may be uncomfortable with something that also feels really good for you. Um,
Oh,
and so that would
yeah.
be kind of my other aspect. So maybe you start to, I mean, you're already looking forward to going through this process just because you're like, this will get me closer. But
Hmm.
that doesn't mean it's always easy. And
No.
so if
Yeah.
you're able to kind of incorporate that into maybe that's the start of your pleasure practice, and then you do two or three things after or something,
Mm.
is kind of like what we call like aftercare, like insects
Okay.
and like there's this aftercare of after this thing has happened, then there's the taking care of yourself physically or emotionally after it. So kind of
Okay.
thinking about what does aftercare look like throughout my fertility journey.
Mm. Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah, because I know a lot of my patients struggle with, especially the shots, if they're doing IVF or medicated cycles, and it can get really just overwhelming, and they can dread it, and it can be super painful,
Hmm.
especially those progesterone shots in oil. Those are the worst.
Hmm.
So I love that idea to pair it with something, and then creating that aftercare. Um, that's so cool. What I'm wondering, what you could pair it with, like good smells or
Oh,
good
all that, I love the senses in
anything.
general. So I would say
Okay.
maybe that's when they're sitting down thinking like what things kind of ignite you. So like I said, for me it's touch. So I'm gonna always go towards something that's touch. But for some people it is they love good smells. So light you a candle, light
Mm.
your incense, put some Cinnabons in the oven, like what, something that smells great. If taste is the
Yeah.
thing, maybe you have a little jar of candy,
Mm.
or maybe you have, some fresh fruit that you just really love, or, you can pair it with something that
Mm.
feels really good for you. Um, and so just depending
Mhm.
on what sense kind of feels the best in your body, then that's kind of how I would pair it.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. That's because, yeah, some folks are going to have different senses that they go towards more
Hmm.
for experiencing pleasure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
I love that. I also feel like Capricorns in general have a superpower of experiencing pleasure. Do you think this is true? My wife's a Capricorn, and she's like one of the best people at experiencing pleasure that I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an
I've
earth
heard some
sign thing.
things, but I may be biased if we're talking about charts. I'm a Capricorn sun, but my Venus is in Scorpio, so I've also got that water
Okay.
energy too. Um,
Okay. Okay.
you know, all the things, all the things. But
Yeah.
I'll
Who
say yeah,
knows?
yep.
Yeah.
I think Capricorns are very straightforward, like to do things that make sense, that feel good. So, I mean, that's part of accessing pleasure too.
Yeah, totally. I love it. That's so cool. So I have this question that has come up a lot in my online course that I teach called Fertile. And I thought you might be a good person to talk about this question with. So in my program, we go through each element. So it's a 5-week program, and each week we go through each element. And when we get to the water element usually has to do with getting in touch with deep desires and sexual energy and that creative power for increasing fertility. And this question comes up about around like, do we have to like how can we let's see, do you think we're able to access that creative power of sexual energy without sex? Or what is the difference between sexual pleasure and pleasure?
I say yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I say yes. I think they're connected, not necessarily the exact same thing.
Mhm.
And I often feel like if you're able to find pleasure in your everyday life in various things, then it becomes easier to kind of tap into that deeper sexual pleasure. Um,
Interesting.
but to me, sexual pleasure doesn't always have to equal sex, you know? And
Right.
even
Okay.
that's kind of the shifting how we think about like what is sex, you know? Because for
Right.
one person, I may define sex in a very, you know, specific way. Somebody else may define it in a
Mhm.
very broad way. And so,
Right.
you know, it's like sex, you know, sex could be a variety of things, but that
Yeah.
sexual, you know, that
Yeah.
sexual pleasure, I sense it is more of a deeper, more, I don't want to say like innate, because for some people it actually
Mhm.
does take some work to be able to tap into that. Um,
Right.
but if we're thinking of water, I kind of think like if you're in the ocean, the beach, the more surface middle water, that's like regular pleasure. You know, I can go out there, I can
Mm.
play, I can have fun. This is still great.
Yeah.
But if I want to go to the sea floor, that's gonna take a little bit more. It's gonna be a journey to get there, and getting down there can be,
Right.
you know, a little scary. It can be a little dark, but
Yeah.
there's also so much life that's down there as well, and so many things
Mm.
that haven't been
Mhm.
discovered or like tapped into. Um, and so
Mm.
that's kind of like if I was thinking of an analogy of that's kind of what I would think of
Yeah.
the difference between regular pleasure, like everyday pleasure, um, and
Mhm.
sexual pleasure.
Oh, I love that. I love that definition. I really resonate with water in general. I'm a Pisces and I have a Scorpio moon, so I have lots of water going on. But I love that visual of the ocean where there's like a continuum of,
Hmm.
it's like it's almost like a spectrum of
Yeah.
pleasure. It's not like, again, no binary,
Hmm.
no, you're either having this kind of pleasure or this kind of pleasure. It's like, yeah, it's just different kinds and different depths. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are back. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. So we are switching over to audio only, and we're going to pick up where we left off on our conversation. Yeah, we had a little snafu and we lost the last bit of our conversation. So we're meeting up again now to re record. And yeah, thank you so much, Jay, for being flexible and for riding this wave with me.
Of course, of course. You know, we flow, we flow.
So we were talking about this beautiful image of the ocean that you used as a metaphor to describe that spectrum of pleasure that folks
Mhm.
can experience. And I just love that vision of pleasure being more of a like a continuum or a spectrum for that to describe like different kinds of pleasure and different depths of pleasure.
Yes, yes. I think everything, let's make it all a continuum and a spectrum.
Yes.
Not as much
Yes.
binaries
Yeah.
and yes, it's all a spectrum.
Exactly. Yeah. And I loved what you said. You had brought in thinking about asexual
Mhm.
folks into that metaphor. Will you talk about that a little bit again?
Yes. So I like to think of pleasure, like I said, on this spectrum and not just kind of
Mhm.
everyday pleasure versus sexual pleasure, because for everyone sexual pleasure can look different, or for some people, especially if they're
Mhm.
asexual or demisexual, they may not experience or desire the sexual aspect of pleasure, but that doesn't mean that they can't experience pleasure
Mm.
or don't experience pleasure. And so it's just knowing that pleasure can look differently for so many people in so many different ways, and there can be two events happening that be the same thing, but the level of pleasure feels different depending on where you are, who you're with, how you're feeling that day, all types of things. And so keeping that in mind and making sure to be inclusive of different people's experiences when we think about pleasure, because the mind always just goes to the sexual and the romantic aspects of pleasure, and like everyone can experience pleasure in some way, form, or fashion.
Right. I love that so much. Yeah, and what I love about this this more expansive, more inclusive definition of pleasure is that it's so queer. It's
Yes.
like kind of when we were talking earlier about like that definition of sex, like what is sex, and from a queer lens, from a queer perspective, it just opens everything up. Like we don't have to stick to those narrow definitions anymore.
Yes, I think for myself personally, I did some kind of pleasure and sexual journey exploration during my postpartum period after my
Mm,
son.
mhm,
And I was actively not having sex then. And
mhm,
so it was very interesting and eye opening to learn about myself in ways and experience pleasure that wasn't tied to sex. And I think once I was able to do that, then once I did start having sex again, like I feel like I've been able to tap into pleasure and experience pleasure sexually and non sexually in a lot more ways than I was before,
mm.
because I had kind of limited pleasure to just one thing or things
Right.
happening one specific way in one specific fashion. Now I'm like, oh, we all deserve pleasure. Let's find pleasure in all the things.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That feels much better to me. It feels more like I can relax around thinking about that concept of pleasure, where sometimes I feel like that concept or discussion around pleasure can feel intimidating or
Mhm.
like pressure, to like, oh, we
Yes.
better feel pleasure and better feel it in this way, or else it's not really real, real pleasure. So that feels really, yeah, that feels so much better in my body to hear that definition. Yeah.
I also love how you said it allows you to relax some when we expand what
Mm,
pleasure can be. Because as we had just
hmm.
mentioned earlier about like being inclusive when talking about accessing pleasure, that also expands to people who are experiencing so many different things in their bodies. And so feeling like they can access pleasure may not be there, whether it's going through
Hmm.
their fertility journey, in postpartum, disabled, in larger
Hmm.
bodies, or in, any array of the different things, feeling like I can't access pleasure, or
Right.
even having like being lower income and having to work multiple jobs and not having time and feeling like I don't have time to think about pleasure because I'm busy all the time,
Totally.
And so, if we expand what is pleasure, how do we access pleasure, how do I make that a part of my day, my life, then I think it's less daunting for a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I love that. All right, we're back on video. Okay, so how can folks find you, support you, buy all your things, and do you have any upcoming events or any offerings that you'd like to talk about?
Yes, yes. So I'm on Instagram at Your Journey with Jay. That is the best way to connect with me and to figure out the links for all the things. I'm constantly like changing websites and trying different platforms and things like that. But no matter what, my Instagram will remain the same, and the link in bio is where you go.
Nice. Yeah.
um, and so the link in bio will have my website, ways to book me for various types of support, resources for all things reproductive justice, as well as how to purchase things or attend offerings that I may have. Um, so, things that I've got going right now, diving back into pleasure work, always doing it, but having more of an emphasis right now, especially with June coming up. So people can purchase a pleasure journal that I have. It's an interactive journal. It's up there now. I wrote it last year. It kind of came together into one book, but it really stemmed from me working with different clients. And like, I'm leaving their house and they're like, what, Jay, I got a question, my 6 weeks postpartum is coming up and I feel this way, or, how should I don't feel like I want to do anything, or I'm excited. I don't, different things. That there were always that question and some hesitancy around like asking and talking about it.
Yeah.
And then in my friend group, I'm always, which I don't know, they designated me this friend, but the person where like I get all the sex questions.
Right.
And so, we'll talk about different things. I'll ask questions, be like, have you thought about this or that? And so then one of my friends was like, they just need a book for this. I was like, you're right.
Yeah.
One, I'm sure there's plenty out there, but also, why not more? And so
Absolutely.
this, it's an interactive journal. So it's not so much like, this is not, if you're like, oh, I want to read about pleasure, I want to learn the technicalities and things like that.
Okay.
It's not that.
Mm-hmm.
It's also not just a lined journal where you just have to write about your own pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
There are pages of that, but that's not the focus. It's really a workbook that has activities for you to think about how you feel about yourself in relation to other people, and then different aspects of pleasure. So even, body love, body acceptance or neutrality, what intimacy looks like for you, what kink may look like for you, how you may want to feel when it comes to pleasure. Like, so many different aspects are kind of hit on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it also has a couple like assessments. If you are with someone, you can kind of fill that out and they can fill it out, and then y'all can discuss.
Nice.
And you're like, I rated our, I put communication at 5 stars and you put it at 2. Hold on, let's figure this out. I thought we were on the same page.
Right.
And so it's kind of a mix. There's a couple like crosswords in there that's just like fun things. And so it's a mixture of quite a bit. It's really supposed to be interactive. And there's a few pages that kind of tell you like, go do this, like try this or watch this show and then write about it.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I love it. I'm also biased because I made it, but it's supposed to help folks no matter where they are in their relationship with pleasure, or their own bodies, or, whatever the case. So the journal is there. And then dropping in June, I have some PDFs that will be available for folks. So maybe you don't desire to do the whole journal right now. You're just kind of focusing on like something very specific. I'll have 3 different PDFs that will be available for download, creating your pleasure practice. And so people will basically have like a little worksheet to help them figure out, how do I create a pleasure practice? What are some things I should consider? And then of course they can tweak based on, who they are as an individual. And then there will be pleasure mapping, which is essentially thinking through, on my body, what does pleasure look like? In my environment, what does pleasure look like? And kind of thinking through and getting creative using colors and like, and kind of mapping out what pleasure, what kind of pleasure, how pleasure shows up for you. And then the last PDF that will be available is about incorporating pleasure into your practice. So specifically for other doulas, I like to coin it like kinky birth work, but
nice.
But specifically for other doulas who oftentimes pleasure isn't much of a conversation when it comes to birth or fertility or loss. And so this is more of a kind of a few questions, a few things to think about of how can you incorporate these conversations of pleasure with your clients into your practice. Because some people are not comfortable talking about it,
Yeah.
And so it's just to kind of help guide doulas specifically. But any, doctors can use it too if they want. But but yeah, so those will be some PDFs available. And lastly, I have a virtual group slash workshop vibe that will be happening in June, called Accessing Pleasure in Postpartum. And that will be postpartum folks getting together, and we're going to be talking about what barriers to accessing pleasure are we currently experiencing, or are they currently experiencing? And then also thinking through some tangible tools and like starting to create that pleasure practice for them. Um, and so postpartum is not just that first 6 weeks. Anybody in the first 3 years of having a kid, come on.
Okay, nice.
And yeah, and also not just if you've had a child, but also if it was like stillbirth, an abortion, a miscarriage, any type of postpartum experience. This applies to you.
Okay, I love that. These resources you've created are just so needed, and I don't feel like there's a lot out there like what you're doing. I feel like this is so expansive and inclusive and important work. And I love the fact that it's interactive, that it's not just reading a book, but it's like invites you in to do the work. I mean, because how else are you gonna, pleasure is interactive and partly physical. And so that makes sense to me that that's the structure that it should be in. So yeah, I love that.
Thank you. I'm excited about it. One, because I see a need for it for people. And I've been really intentional about like creating things, not just that I feel like should be there, but that I'm hearing need to be there.
Right.
And that I've like tried myself. So I'm not going to walk you through creating a pleasure practice if I have not tried this, and I haven't done it as well.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for it. I think right now, a barrier, I guess, I'm experiencing with it or noticing showing up is that a lot of people are experiencing, disconnects when it comes to pleasure, have the desire to connect more, but there's still kind of that like slight shame around it. Of like, oh, I don't really want to talk about it, or if I, or is this something I can just kind of, it'll get better, do I need to go to a workshop to learn about pleasure? It should come naturally, and so that's what I'm noticing when I talk to people, some things that are coming up for them. No, we are prioritizing pleasure all 2023 and beyond. So
yes, I love
get
it.
this little PDF or get a book or get this thing. And I think that's why there's different levels. So if you're like, I'm not sure, just do a download. It's 2 pages. Okay, do it. See how it feels. No pressure.
Yeah.
And then maybe you're like, let me get a book. Let me go to a group, depending on where you are.
Right.
But I think that internal release of like shame or unsureness, or like I'm experiencing this and now we're talking about it, kind of bringing it to light. I think for some people it's kind of hard to take action on, getting a resource.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I am so excited to send folks to your resources that you've created, because I feel like this comes up a lot in my work where it's like, I'm often encouraging folks to create some sort of pleasure practice or to center pleasure, especially on their fertility journey. But then it sort of stops there. Then I'm like, then go to someone else to figure out how to do that. Cause I have some ideas, but I think they're pretty limited. So this is so good. I'm so excited. And like, I cannot wait to just like direct people to you so they can like, these are like, this is how you do it. Like, this is the, the steps or the, kind of nuts and bolts of how you actually put together, the practicality of that.
Yeah. And then you can, decorate it and make it in the way, add your glitter, do it, make it your own. Yeah. But I think that is, where people struggle, like you said, the nuts and the bolts of like, how do we build the thing? And then we can decorate it and paint it and add stickers. Yeah.
Totally. Make it pretty. Good. Well, I will put all of that info in the show notes, all the links to everything you just mentioned, so people can access it easily. And I just want to thank you so much for this conversation, for sticking with me through all these tech issues that we experienced. I am just so grateful that we were able to have this conversation and that folks are going to hear it and gain so much knowledge and feel so supported and seen through the work that you're doing. So thank you for being here today and yesterday and the day before.
Yeah, and thank you for creating this space and holding it for people to have these conversations. I told you via messages, like I had been listening, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, yes, yes. So these conversations also need to happen because people are having them maybe individually, but to have a platform where people can share and reach more, I think is so important, especially on fertility journeys. With people of the global majority, with queer folks. I think that's all like so important. So thank you for creating this space, for people to come and share and, expand.
Yes, absolutely.